the fuck?
It makes it difficult for them to little. We could lose every day. Well, you wouldn't have to put out a lot of that. Just where there was something good. You could. I think you could. I think you could. We just wouldn't have to make it clear that there's yeast. It's very powdery. Very, very powdery yeast.
Yeah, for y'all's faith listeners, will become a part of soon.
That's a pretty good idea. I like that.
Save this kind of stuff for people that are so ball deep.
Chris, write that down. I don't know if are you listening to it?
Yeah, I heard.
I don't think he likes that idea.
Well, we can set that up so that nobody else can see it.
A lot of podcasts for that.
We should do our own version of lunch. So, lunch meat was something the Brewing Network did. Are we live? Ish.
Live-ish.
So there's audio?
No.
No, okay, alright. So, lunch meat was something the Brewing Network did where the same group of people that talked about beer would come in and they would
No, it was
just
the
talk
same
about.
group. It was just Justin and Judy. Yeah, small.
I thought it was somebody else too.
Yeah, maybe every so often somebody would
Like
show
Doc
up.
would come in.
Maybe, but no, they would record it at noon on a Friday, and they wouldn't post it until like an hour or two before the actual dinner. So
But they were just like reading headlines and talking about just everyday bullshit.
yeah,
It was good, dude. I
it was
liked it.
stupid. Like it was hilarious.
It was stupid.
If you liked the show already and their humor and jokes, you liked it.
If you
But
listen to the show, it's because you like those
it,
guys.
it offered zero like actual advice, substance. So very concept.
You know, when I'm driving for 8 hours, I don't necessarily.
Dude, I was
Oh yeah, oh I was.
Hey, we're live. Hey, we're live.
Hey, Brandon, it looks like you're at Let's Jump.
Oh, you should check in there.
I'm not at Let's Jump.
You're next door.
So I'm telling you, you got to buy that suite and open up an adult store there.
Call it Let's Jump.
Hey, we're reserving that for Spud's Buds, yo.
Let's what?
Spuds Buds, nice. I like
Is that
that.
like potato weed?
No, it's supposed to have been Stubbs Buds, but I don't know why I said Spuds and Spuds and stuff.
Okay.
Spuds and Buds.
Potato store.
What's our time
So
frame?
are we back or? Because we're back to the radio station on the TV here.
Oh, hey.
All right, okay. I can fix that.
He has no idea.
We
I really
have no
I really
idea.
don't. It's been a while since I've done this thing.
I better not do that. We might get sued.
Yeah, we'll get a
Yeah,
claim on our freaking YouTube channel.
You'll get pulled from YouTube.
Such BS. We have to fight it all the time.
Any reference to Star Wars will get you yanked.
Looks
You
like you
said
just
Star
referenced
Wars,
it.
yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
Yeah,
I
thanks
guess we can say whatever now.
Thanks for ruining the show, Chris.
Are we there yet?
there yet? We there yet?
Yeah,
Yeah, we are there.
not yet.
Oh,
Almost.
Facebook says 38 seconds.
It's more like a guideline.
Ah, the screen just turned red.
Okay.
are we back?
It's not popping up on Facebook yet.
Yes, it is.
Facebook says 15
Not for me.
You're not special.
We're live.
All right,
All right.
then.
And then we're
So,
back.
We think we're live
We've
right
really
now.
got to work on these rejoins.
Well, we're not really
Hey, I
sure.
did
Back.
the countdown and everything, man.
No, there's
For
a
us.
there's a radio station on the TV, dude.
We can't see that.
Oh, well, my
I
bad. I
know.
didn't realize that.
That's it.
All right. You. Welcome. Go. Now we're live again. All right. Or
All
maybe
this
we were
damn
live before. I don't know.
technology. Oh,
So-
we've been live, yeah.
So we're gonna get away from our bitching and complaining and get into talking about wood aging, which was our
Well,
subject
see, they
here.
didn't hear all of that shit at the break where people were actually yelling at the top of their lungs about crap. So, you know.
They heard the first
Nobody
part of
was
the show,
yelling,
though.
dude.
Oh, I was. Oh.
What did I miss?
But yeah, now on to the wood aging thing, because
Yeah.
we've had a lot of
break
listener
out the
questions
wood.
about this recently. And more or less,
Yeah.
the best ways to
I had a
actually age a
stalker.
beer.
I had a stalker. He kept asking me about my wood.
About your wood. See, here come the dumb jokes, too. This could fill up so much time.
Well, luckily we had a
Definitely fill
short
up some-
first half, so we've got time to get into the deep into the wood, so
Yeah.
to speak.
Take the wood deep.
So I think we want to start off kind of talking about a few of the basic ways to wood age.
To use wood?
Yeah, the ways to use your wood. You don't just want to go willy nilly, you know. You've got to go into it
Fling
with a
that
plan.
thing everywhere.
You've got to go into it with a plan, you know. So
you get that
there's
wood
several
wet.
different formats that you can use wood in to wood age your beer at home. Personally, I think this is a little bit of an overlooked part of home brewing in that it's so easy to wood age beer at home and get it to come out good, and can really take a really good beer and make it a really great beer. That I think people should do it more. It's inexpensive. It's really easy to do, and I personally really like wood aged beers.
Right.
So I've done this for a long time just with cubes. But there's basically there's a few different ways, right? You got the chips, you got the cubes,
Cubes,
you've got
tablet
staves.
pellets, spirals, honeycombs.
Yeah,
They've even got powders out there now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
powders,
the tablets.
yeah.
Yeah, they've got sleeves of tablets you can just put into your carboys and whatnot, that kind of thing.
We even have those at the
Yeah.
store.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
it's-
then you have actual barrels to put it in too.
The barrels, I think, is for a home brewer, that still seems like the most difficult. And
Oh,
Austin-
I agree. Yeah,
We have Austin in
The
to
most
comment on
difficult.
this. He's become the Barrelmaster up there at Rahr, and they keep developing the program to get larger and larger. And they've been doing some barrel bourbon aged stuff, man, since almost the beginning, I guess.
Yeah,
up
they've
there.
been doing bourbon barrel aged winter warmer since as long as I've been around. That's
We just
like
poured some
8
of that
years now.
too. So
Oh,
the
damn, it's
16.
good.
So,
And it's one of those things that everyone looks at a barrel. That's the thing that, like, we want to make this. A barrel is great. They're fantastic to have sitting somewhere in your house and see that sitting there. You know what I mean? For a home brewer, usually you're really only talking 5 to 10 gallons in a barrel for the size that you're wanting. But, like, the real deal when you really get out there and to what's happening with barrel aging, it's how many gallons? Would be at
standard
53?
bourbon barrel is 55.
55,
and
okay.
then wine barrels tend to be 59. But they vary in a large variety of sizes.
So, like, the stuff that you really want to get, usually not coming from any of the big name, anything like that. You're getting from some small craft producers if it's a spirit distillery of some kind out there. It's going to usually be smaller, isn't it? I mean,
No, dude. Think about how much bourbon is out there. And bourbon by law has to have, be used new charred American oak barrels.
Right.
So they're producing hundreds of barrels. The bourbon industry produces hundreds of bourbon barrels every single day. Most of them get shipped off to Scotland. And so that's why they're typically, I think, one of the most used barrels by brewers is because they're so readily available, unless they tend to be one of the more cheaper sides.
I think bourbon actually blends well with a lot of beers too.
As well,
so-
yeah, it does. But when if I wanted to get into sherry barrels, those are hundreds and hundreds of barrels versus $150.
So you would like to
barrel.
put your wood in sherry?
Sure. I like to put my sherry in wood.
My sherry.
I think that's the thing, though. When you look at what's going on, a lot of times when people think about wood aging a beer, it's usually a bourbon barrel of some kind, and that's what's happening in the industry the most often. When you get to buy it on the shelf, is it's going to be that kind of beer. And there's a lot more experimentation now.
It's just readily available. Like
Right.
I have an almost endless supply of bourbon barrels, but I don't have that when it comes to tequila, scotch, wine, sherry,
right,
brandy, any of those things.
Which-
I don't have a super ready supply because A, I'm not around those, and B, there is just fewer volume less volume produced
And you're
in
all
those
fighting for 'em.
beverages versus bourbon, which there's tons of.
Right.
A lot of rum barrels we've gotten, they'll have some distillery of some bourbon mark on there because they were first a bourbon barrel, then they were a rum barrel, and now we're getting them. Same with Scotch barrels. So, the entire world uses bourbon barrels. They're constantly available for everything, but that's not the case with other spirit barrels.
Rum and scotch depend a lot more on the product that's used to create the liquor than they do the character from the barrel, right? Where bourbon is almost entirely barrel character. Am I correct
Absolutely
in that?
not.
No?
I mean, bourbon, another aspect of bourbon is it has to be at least 51% blue corn.
Corn, right.
So, that's... bourbon is the only American delineated spirit by law.
Blue corn? Just regular corn, right? Not blue
Maybe I thought it was blue corn, but maybe I'm
Just
wrong.
corn is what I've heard.
It's maybe I'm getting confused with agave or tequila. It has to be blue agave. But anyway, it has to be corn, flaked maize or whatever. New charred oaken barrel. At minimum of I think 2 years, maybe 3. It doesn't actually have to be produced in Kentucky or Tennessee. So you can have Texas-made actual bourbons or Colorado bourbons, and so
the producer.
Sorry.
and so
Maybe
they're just constantly being made. Whereas a rum maker, but they care about that that corn that goes in there affects the flavor of a bourbon. You can't just make an all barley, distillate and age it in a new charred American oak barrel and have it taste the same. That corn, that sweetness is a lot of that flavor. You talk to Scotch distilleries, they'll fight between, is it an all malt Scotch or is it a blended Scotch, which is a better quality? They have all sorts of arguments. What you put in the product from the very beginning matters. So it's not just the barrel. It's everything.
But it's coming off at 180 proof neutral grain spirit, though, right?
But it's from that corn base. You get different flavors where you put oats in it or wheat, rye. All those things matter. Just like we brew with different malts, you different base malt. Oh, it's the same Levabond. Okay, well, it's a slightly different other character.
Well, you can't compare that. I mean,
no, it's exactly the same thing.
Because you're pulling out almost exclusively alcohol. With
But they're
product.
brewing a beer. They're making a different thing. If it didn't what you made didn't matter, they would use 100% of whatever the cheapest thing they could get. But they're not because they want the flavor of that ingredient.
Okay.
Well, what it gets down to, though, whenever it goes into the barrel, I think then what it comes to is, say, the level of char that is in there. Or are they doing pretty much a standard across most of the brands?
Probably each distillery probably has their preferred level of char. Some distilleries do their own charring. So I mean, you can have just from a small level to a really heavy. I think probably all bourbons are probably pretty heavy char.
Right. Yeah. Because I think that's a thing when you get to the home brewer level. That's something that you really have to take in consideration with whatever source you're going to apply to your beverage.
Yeah.
I mean, light, medium, heavies. That's pretty much the range that you see, and the heavy is, I think, what most of those bourbon barrels would be. Where there's a lot more of that vanilla character. And
I think they'd be definitely on the heavy, if not even extra heavy.
Extra heavy.
I think it probably more matters. I mean, I'm not particularly aware of what all types of availables are available to homebrewers, but for professional level, the barrels I get from wineries are not charred.
Right. It's just the wine that was in there for that.
And so it's that black, the bourbon that are charred, or you can order brand new barrels and you can order them custom charred.
Right. And I think that's the thing when you get into it for our level. if you're lucky enough to be able to go out and buy something like that, but most of the time a home brewer's not going to be able to fill up a normal size barrel. They're going to have to take the whole club or whatever, a whole bunch of home brewers together to fill up one, and then someone's got to store it, and that's a heavy beast, and there's a lot to deal with something like that. You know, we're going to get into that part too, but on our level, you know, there are all the small products that are out there, and like Brandon said, it's real easy to get some character into a beer or whatever fast. Honestly, I think from what you see, it's going to depend on the char, you know, the toast level usually of what you're really going to pull out of something. But I mean, if you're using chips, that could take a week before it has some oak character or whatever wood character.
A pretty fair amount depending on how you're doing it. Actually, I use the cubes, and generally 2 weeks.
Right,
is what I.
And see, the thing though is like chips, powder. That's more of the one-dimensional kind of characteristic, whereas like once you hit cubes and go beyond that up all the way to having a barrel, that's where you tend to have a whole lot more range in that flavor profile, but it might take a little longer, right?
Yeah, and we talked about that a little bit when James Lawn was in here about it, or no, excuse me, it was when JB was in here from the Acre. He was talking about the advantages and disadvantages to pulling it out quickly and pulling it out slowly, and pulling out your wood quickly or pulling it out slowly. I think it's better with Stubby behind the glass for this one, actually.
He keeps missing those.
No, but when he was talking about like chips or powder or something like that, where you're pulling the flavor out of it very quickly, the problem is that you're not able to gauge what you're pulling out of it, and so you can do it more quickly than if you're using something else, but you're not able to say, okay, now I've got the character, now I want to stop,
right?
And before you pull out too much and maybe pull out some astringency and that kind of thing.
Does that matter how long or short your wood is?
Well,
actually, yes. Yes, it does.
Okay, there you go.
The size of your wood matters.
And that's
I don't know why I'm not more prepared for these comments. You know, it was like a deer in the headlights on that one for some reason.
Well, like Brandon said, you know, cubes, I mean, I can most of the time a couple of weeks, a month.
Yeah,
I think a lot of times a month is a general range up to even longer.
Well, it kind of depends on how you prep them.
Yeah.
You know, for me, the way I've always prepped them is that I soak them either in bourbon, or the last one I did is in rum or something like that. So that, yeah, it's about how you prep your wood. Stubby's not going to be able to make it through the rest of this episode. See, because you have to sanitize it somehow going into it. Or maybe you don't. In my mind, you do.
Are you going to use spirits, or are you going to just go for the bare wood?
And so you've got to remember that while you're soaking it in the spirits, that's actually pulling character out of it anyway. So when you dump the whole thing in, you've already pulled a bunch of flavor out of it,
right?
And so you've done a lot of the work ahead of time. And that I think that's the reason I don't like the chips as much, because and I do like chips. I've used them before. I think the cubes are better personally. Just
I like
for
the
what
chips
I use
for the fast kind of things in like a lighter beer. Like if you wanted to use tequila and a little bit of oak character, putting those two things together for a few days, dumping it in your beer, and a week later you have the character you want.
Yeah, and I think the lighter toasts.
Yeah,
it
lighter
works
toast,
better with those.
definitely.
Yeah, and your results from what you did with tequila before speak for themselves. I mean, that was really,
right. I mean,
really
that's
good.
it works, you know, real fast for something like that. Obviously, your danger is overdoing it and then having something that's more that it just becomes buttery. You know, the oaky butteriness, I guess, is
So,
a
do y'all
little
get
bit of
actual
vanilla.
like charred, burnt cubes?
The cubes can be
Because we've
pretty
gotten
dark.
like wood staves and things before, but they're pieces of wood. They're not burnt or charred.
Well,
in
the
any
terminology
way.
is that they're toasted. I don't
Yeah.
know. I suppose that's in a way it's a
Can
char.
I offer an alternative way to sanitize them and probably get a better actual like charred barrel character?
Please do.
Is actually char and toast, like burn the outside of all those cubes yourself,
right?
Okay.
And then add them to your fermenter, carboy, whatever.
Are you not worried about what's inside?
No, because that's the
okay.
surface area.
Okay.
It's like the original purpose of charring barrels was to sanitize them, sterilize them. It wasn't to get flavor. It was, we're going to burn this, and then it'll just be burnt char. It'll be sterile, and we'll fill with liquid, and we'll be all right. Same thing if you're burning charring the outside of all of those oak cubes. You know, you want to go a little bit of a depth, obviously, but unless you've been like soaking them in moldy water, the insides are probably going to be pretty sterile.
Right.
Think of the same thing of you make a steak, you only char the outside. You're not worried about the inside because that inside is plenty like safe and like you can eat it raw. You know, like people who want them really rare, they're not going to get sick because the inside of that steak is just fine. It's just the outside's been exposed to the air. That's all you have to worry about. Same concept with the chips, unless something is really wet and soaking in.
Okay.
So possibly do that.
Your wet wood.
It's also a distinction I would make between y'all are talking about soaking them in that alcoholic liquid, that liquor, and getting some of that flavor out. Well, that's adding a new flavor in.
Yes, it is adding a new
wood
flavor
chips
as well.
in themselves are just the wood flavor. They're not the liquor flavor. But before we were talking about how the liquor flavor contributed to the beer, and they're entwined, but they are also separate.
And it's a way of mimicking a bourbon barrel.
But it's a thing I think a lot of
have
people
some bourbon flavor
get
too.
mixed with. They get lost in what is wood flavor and what is like the liquor flavor. What is barrel character?
I agree
what
with
is
you on
wood
that, yeah.
flavor? And they're different things, and I think it's important to make a distinction of them.
You're right, because I think with home brewers, a lot of times if they taste anything that has a bourbon characteristic, they that's what they assume is what the flavor is coming out of that. Where I mean, like oak on its own, depending on the toast, char, whatever.
And then
the red,
also
the
the
white,
source of the oak,
yeah,
too.
red, white, etc. Vanilla, toasted coconut, cinnamon, pepper, sweet baked bread, caramel. American can have a campfire, coffee, cooked fruit. French can be sweet, fruity, spicy, or jammy. Hungarian, vanilla, black pepper, and chocolate. I mean, that's a variety of differences in just oak. And like right now, just in our shop, we have cedar. Well, we've had it at least. We've had some of these, if not all of them. Cedar, white grapefruit, sandalwood, white pepper and clove, birch, toffee, butterscotch, honey croissant, light lemon, tropical fruit, ash, campfire, marshmallow, light grass. Light grass sounds like a weird character to want to add to something.
I'd like to go back to honey croissant real quick.
That does sound good.
Hickory, honey barbecue, smoked bacon, applesauce, cherry, butter brickle, ripe cherry, fresh grass, meringue, hard maple, maple candy, light spice, nutmeg, cinnamon, syrup, bread or bakery, hint of cocoa, that kind of stuff.
So
all of these
I
have
heard-
a lot of different.
I heard fresh grass a lot.
Yeah, I know.
So like, if you like weed, do you like put oak in your beer?
Well, what do you
mean,
think
you need
wood
hops
is?
with
It's
that.
basically big grass.
Okay, there you go.
And I think you take those kind of characteristics first. If you know what the wood that you're purchasing is, and then you're toasting it, you're pulling out a range of that. Like the lighter flavors, obviously, you're coming out with either something that's closer to bare, like a light toast of some kind. And you do want to toast it, I think, if it's going to be a raw wood in the first place, right? I mean, that's the key to that. It's-
Yeah, no,
As long as it's cured and dried, it should be.
I mean,
like, safe
Well,
for,
I think it limits the flavor you
consumption.
get out of it if you don't toast it. And I used that. I
Activation.
used the red oak on that beer that we did with Cody Martin with the grape must, the saison that we did,
Yeah,
and
right.
I
I thought that
used
gave-
some red oak in it. And I thought that the contribution from the oak was very minimal. And I
but
wish
you
I
know
would have
what?
toasted it.
I
Some.
wonder if that was not just the red oak. I mean, that's not what they use for barrels.
But
So,
if I would
mean,
have toasted it, I know it would have had more flavor contribution.
yeah, you would have added more
Yeah.
toast flavor or
And that's
roasty character, or you know what I mean, or charred flavor. But I think what you have to look at is, white oak tastes different than red oak or cherry, or all of those different woods have different flavors. That's why even when you're smoking meat, certain fruit,
Right.
I mean certain woods give you different flavors. So
We've got two questions here on Facebook.
is it about the taste of your wood?
Matthew Thomas wants to know, is the length of your wood as important as the time you wait to pull out?
Yes, actually.
And I would say that yes, yeah, I would agree. If your wood is not as long, you don't wait. You wait longer to pull out.
Choke it.
No, and then Chris Gray is asking, so would
You
you
actually
recommend
wait.
using vodka? And I think that goes to what Austin was talking about, in that if you're going to use a liquor that has a flavor to it, it should have a purpose to it. You're mimicking a bourbon barrel or a rum barrel or
Right.
something like that, because you are getting a flavor contribution from that. If you want just the flavor of the wood, cue the stubby laugh, then then vodka would be good for that, because it's neutral and you're not going to get flavor out of it.
You'll get a little bit of that alcohol flavor.
Yeah.
Hey,
Well,
soak 'em
depending
for-
on how much you use.
Soak them for as little 5-10 minutes tops. Maybe just get a spritzer just enough to soak into that very surface area. You could even steam them if you've got, like a double boiler, or just put your spaghetti pot over, with the holes in it,
people
over
make
your big
wood
pot.
essences too,
Just
like
put that over and steam it for like 10 minutes to sterilize it. If all you're doing is try to sterilize it, try to do it in the least flavor impactful way possible.
Right.
because you're always getting some extraction.
Because
alcohol,
even
boiling.
that alcohol won't give you any like flavor like bourbon or rum, sweet, individual characters of spiciness of anything like that. It'll just be that pure alcohol, but there'll still be a material that will soak into the beer.
Right.
But I think you
And it
can
might
do it
be-
in a small enough quantity that it probably.
I mean, you
depending
can,
on the beer. It depends on the
but
beer.
see, this
you know?
but that's the issue with brewing on such small batches is you have so much surface area that a little amount will end up being a great amount. So
Well, and that's a good segue into why are you using these different formats and what's the difference. So when you talk about chips versus cubes versus going to staves or an entire barrel, what is the difference? And the difference is the surface area contact. in
Right.
it. And when you talk about a brewery using a 55 or 59 gallon barrel, what you got to realize is that the surface area versus the amount of volume is a much different ratio than if you were to buy a 5-gallon barrel and put your 5-gallon batch of beer in it. There's a lot more surface
or
area
a
of
5-gallon
wood.
more with 2 ounces of oak or something like
Right,
that.
right, and that's one of the reasons we use the smaller formats is that it mimics that ratio of the large format a little bit better. When you're using a 5-gallon barrel, it doesn't take very long at all for you to get to the same amount of flavor out of that barrel as it would take months for a commercial brewery.
So
to
if
do.
you go back and listen to, I thought this was a very informative, podcast was one we had with JB when he talks about, the different types of wood and what flavors you get from them, and how he seemed to think that from barrels themselves, since you're using a big barrel, you get a lot less surface area and something like that, so it does take longer. But the idea is that you get a more mellow wood character than what you're going to get from maybe chips. So really,
it happens so quickly that you're able to stop it at a certain point if you want. You can taste it and say,
Right.
this is where I want it to be. Where with chips, because there's such a large surface area to it and you're getting the flavor very quickly, you can very quickly pass up the flavor you want and get into some of the other flavors that you don't
some
want.
flavors just take time to develop,
Right.
and they only develop slowly. Lagers, for example, they just take time. People say they can make fast lagers in 2 weeks. No, they can't. It's the flavors that are there that are not there take time to either make the beer without creating those flavors or take time to create those flavors. And you just can't do them without time. Like, I wholeheartedly agree with JB's statement that aging slower and a larger surface area creates different flavors even than the smaller. You're totally right in the whole more surface area overshoot it faster. So for the larger surface area, you have a larger window to pinpoint. Like for me as a professional brewer, see on Monday I taste a barrel, it's ready for packaging. I have a couple weeks, a few weeks at least where I can package that and I know it'll taste like that. I don't have to do it the
Right.
next day. Whereas a 5-gallon barrel you might. But you also develop flavors just slowly and over time that you just will package so fast at that smaller size that you'll just never even create those flavors in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you store for a long period of time, you'll get to be able to create those.
I can say that I've had the best luck with cubes, me personally. But
Yeah, me
you
too.
got to be patient. I mean, it takes a long time.
It
I mean,
doesn't even
takes-
take that long, really.
Yeah,
with cubes,
I know,
though.
but it still takes at least 6 weeks before you start getting.
I was just saying
flavor.
they just brought out a deal of tortilla chips, and they poured pastacani sauce.
What is this? How did you even manage
that?
that? How did you manage that? Wow. We're like, where did that come from?
Wow. Which episode was that? That suddenly
That was a
Burger King
Germany.
Beef Ranger in Germany. Yes, I have. I don't know exactly.
You can't
what
stop
that
this.
means. Yes.
I don't know. Can everybody
right.
hear this, or are only we hearing this?
I
It's
don't
possible
know what
that we're
the
laughing and
hell
nobody knows what we're talking
this
about.
happened.
Good
That was the
question.
weirdest damn thing I've ever seen. Sorry.
Okay. Wow.
But the context we were talking to JB about it was that he was talking about how long it's going to take
Burger
for a
King Beef
distillery
Ranger.
to put out a bourbon. You know that it's going to, and we had asked him, you know, have you considered using a smaller format, chips or cubes or something like that? And he had said no, for exactly what you're talking about, that you just don't get the same flavors out of it, and that it's faster to pull the flavor out, but you're pulling other things out necessarily that you don't want to, and certain things won't develop, and so I agree with Stubby that I think the cubes are a nice happy medium for a home brewer, and that it happens slow enough that some things are allowed to develop, but it doesn't take months to do it. I've got a quad that I'm aging on the cubes right now, and I think they're at about 2.5 or 3 weeks now, and it's ready to go. That's no big deal. The 3 weeks for a quad.
No. Well, I mean, the same thing, too. If you want to take longer without going the full barrel route, they have the spirals. You could take a stave or two from an actual barrel, and use that. It depends on what you're looking for. The honeycombs have been a new thing where you see there's a lot of surface area in that. But there's not usually a whole lot when you buy it, so you leave it in there for longer, things like that. I think another thing to kind of cover here, too, when people are adding this, you'll see, like, okay, if you were soaking the cubes in bourbon and you wanted to know when to add it, most of the time they're going to sink. Like, if you put it just enough to let them float a little bit, they're going to drop down, and depends on what you want from it. But you could either add most of the spirits with it or a portion or something like that. Depends on what you're looking for. But when you add them into the actual fermenter too, they'll typically tend to float for a bit. And when you see them dropping down, you know that there's some absorption there happening, and that you should start tasting it and see what's going on there. This is the point of time. Like chips, they don't take that long to drop in, and then you can immediately taste them as well.
Well,
So-
and I think what you have to look at when you're selecting what you want to use for your beer is what are you using it for. I mean, because if you're wanting if you're just wanting a hint of oak or something, just to maybe enhance the flavor, but not be a barrel aged type beer, I think oak the chips are fine for that.
Right.
And I think maybe something lighter like a Saison or something like that.
Exactly.
Maybe trying to get some type of light oak flavor into it, as opposed to a darker beer like a stout or something like that you're trying to get that bourbon barrel flavor in.
Exactly.
It's two different animals.
There's no exact amount of time you have to leave a beer in a barrel. It's just how much are you looking for? What are you looking for? What are you putting in there? Because there are some beers that I might, a light tequila barrel, might put that in there or a light beer and tequila barrel, might put in that for 1 to 2 months tops.
Right.
Whereas there's other barrels that might leave in there for like 6 months to a year. It just depends on what you're doing. Like,
I think a big part of that too is know exactly what you're looking for from it. So if you have say a quad or a stout or something like that you're thinking, I really like this beer, I bet it would be great barrel aged or wood aged. Don't just think, okay, I'm going to throw some wood in it. Think about some of the beers that you've drank that have that barrel aged character to it, and what it is that you like about them. Like me personally, I like the vanilla flavor that comes out of some oak. I like that Hungarian oak flavor,
Right.
and that's what I shoot
Spicier,
for with it's a little bit spicier, and that's what I shoot for with the barrels or the wood aged beers that I do. And I like there to be some of the liquor taste in it. Like this last time I used a rum that I really liked, or normally I'll use some
Especially
bourbon.
if it's in the front.
Yeah, I always liquor in the front.
Poker in the rear.
But have an idea in mind ahead of time, and go into it and choose your materials and choose your scheduling and all that to hit a specific idea. Don't just throw some wood in your beer and just see what happens. You want to have a specific idea, because you can end up making a beer not as good as it was before you put it in as well.
And
Yeah,
if
I'm
you
not
spend
gonna
some
throw
time on it.
You're saying don't be
in a
careless
bourbon
with your
barrel.
wood?
Right.
Right, that's going to be
Do what?
You're saying don't
What?
be careless with your wood?
That's right.
Okay.
I'll be throwing it around. But I mean, even something like you said, a blonde may not suffer from a little bit of oak and a little bit of bourbon, but it's a little bit compared to what you would put into Russian Imperial Stout. Yeah, a little bit of wood.
Yeah, my wife's a blonde,
She like a little bit of wood?
every once in a while. I'm married though, so
So we've got We've got a question here on Facebook. Says, seems to me the more surface area would easily allow a novice to overshoot the flavor profile they're looking
Amen.
for.
Yes.
How about dividing the batch into a 1 liter and 2 liter and larger to find where your sweet spots are for the batch you are aging?
You know, and I think that's a good point. Anytime that you do any kind of barrel age, it's not a bad idea if you have some left over that you can blend back in. And the reason I say that is because if you do get too much astringency or something from the wood, you could actually you can blend it back and kind of even that out a little bit. And I know a lot of breweries probably do that.
I would say it's a necessity if you're barrel aging. We purposely brew more than we'll fill the barrels so that we have what I call top off wort or top off beer, and I'll fill a number of kegs with that top off beer, and I'll just keep it on hand. And every couple of months I'll go around. I got some equipment, and I'll just push some of that beer out of that keg and top off those barrels and keep them filled up. It not only keeps the wood hydrated and thus swelled, and prevents any wood contraction from air getting in. It also prevents any contamination, oxidation. You do not want any air. That's the biggest thing, really, for both.
When you're using a barrel, you're talking about.
Yes, for using a barrel. So it's both.
It's on your scale and ours.
Yeah, and even more, the smaller it is, those 5-gallon barrels, you probably should, if you have a 5-gallon barrel, you should probably be topping it off every, few weeks top, at least, check that. I know I had a barrel one time, it was a 5-gallon barrel, and I left it for a year or two, and I filled it with 5 gallons, and I got 2 out. It condensed so much. And I obviously left that barrel way too long, and that was I just forgot it.
And that was a sour too, right? I mean,
yeah,
so it's kind of a different aspect.
Well, in the middle of having it, I moved, and then it got lost in a closet, so it wasn't an intentional wait. It was I found it, was oh shit, I still have this. Yeah, so I mean, we have that for 55 gallons as well. Those big barrels, fooders. Every wooden container it exists, you'll have evaporation. So you got to keep them topped off, prevent oxidation and things like that. And honestly, but I say that about oxidation being bad, but in a sense, I also think for barrels or barrel aged beers, it's actually a good thing, and actually what makes the difference between a barrel aged beer versus just a wood aged beer. Because that barrel, kind of like a lager, has a long enough time to sit there and kind of mellow out and ripen and do its thing. A long time barrel aged beer aged in a barrel, not spirals, cubes, anything like that, but in a wooden vessel, I guess to say, not just a barrel, but a wooden vessel, is that it has that ingress and exgress of the oxygen and the air going in and out. It breathes through that wood throughout the season, and that both wild beers and clean beers changes the character of the beer more than just aging it on the wood. It goes by swelling it into that wood. It goes into the wood and then extract flavors out of it, exactly like the whiskey, the bourbon does, the scotch, the rum, the tequila. It does the same thing.
Yeah, I was at a distillery in Arizona. They were saying that was an issue for them because it's always hot and always dry there. That they needed to, inside where they age, they needed to artificially control the climate to get that swelling.
So, I mean, some breweries are in areas where they can set barrels out and let them breathe with the ambient air, and that's great. Other breweries want theirs at a constant temperature to do that less. Other breweries might artificially do it, like you just said. But there's something to be said for that. Even if you have it at a constant temperature, it's still going to do it, just at a slower rate. Mm-hmm. And to me, that very slow, almost like micro-oxidation is what really will make the difference between a barrel-aged beer and that same beer aged in a stainless tank on oak chips or spirals or something like that, because it has that ability to go in and out of the wood.
And I think that's kind of like when you're doing, and that could be a whole other conversation when it comes to aging sour beers and wood, because you're dependent on that oxidation for a lot of the flavors that some of those bacteria will produce. So,
well, sour breweries don't want that. They want it even less than we do.
Right.
That's what creates.
It depends on what beer you're doing too.
Well, yeah, it depends on what bacteria you have in there, but typically lactobacillus bread,
you don't want
in the presence of oxygen, they'll produce acetobacter. So you really don't want that.
Well, acetic acid, but I would say
creates
Well, I'm just saying that pediococcus, from what I understand, will actually produce acetic acid in the presence of oxygen.
Yeah.
But that's okay in slight amounts. And like
Again, slight amounts. The micro oxidation, very slow.
Well, I'm saying acetic acid is acceptable in certain sour
but
styles.
You want that but clean sour regardless. You still want that slow, controlled uptake where you can like pin it down and do it in such a slow manner that's in such small amounts that it's enjoyable, acceptable. You like it. You can control it. You can stop it if it's too much. All things like that. Where the smaller vessels, they go through that phases to create those things so fast that you don't get those slow builds and reactions. Fooders are almost even better because they're even less surface area. So it takes longer to create the entire batch. But by the end of it, it's so much more controlled and slow that you create these flavors that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. You can speed up like the extraction of wood flavor into the liquid, but you can't speed up that micro oxidation. Like that's something that I really feel just takes time. It just does. You can't speed it up because it's the slow, small increase of it, along with the other degradation of other aspects of the beer. Because beer is a live product; it's always degrading in a sense. That's what lagering, ripening, aging of beers is. Some flavors, compounds are breaking down, and that's what creates some flavors that we like. Other beers creates flavors we don't like. For barrel aged beers, we typically like them. And that slow breakdown in combination with that micro oxidation is what really creates to me the magic of a barrel aged beer versus just a wood aged beer, because it's all of that coming together. It's not just one thing. And you can speed up one thing, you can speed up another thing, but you can't always speed them up in conjunction with each other. It's that balance.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
No, go ahead. I was going to go back to what Matthew was saying about splitting up into smaller batches to try it. That's one thing that James Harrington and I did at one point, where we took a large batch of like an imperial stout and broke it out into 2-gallon batches and used, like 5 different types of wood on it. And that was a real learning experience in that I'm sure glad about 4 of those. I'm sure glad we didn't do a whole batch with it, because you learn real quickly what woods.
What you're saying also would help
work and
a standard home brewer at home, which can't take the time, say, and have what you're using to make a big batch of something. Blending at home, you could try that too. I mean, it's the same concept. Think about blending. If you really want to do it, think about what you're doing. Try those different things, like a little bit more over here, a little bit less over there.
Absolutely, yeah. You brew 5 gallons of beer, and it's like, oh, this is way too much wood, way too much barrel aged character. Well, you've got a gallon or two of non aged
we
beer.
did one with the Spanish cedar that was like it was just all wood taste.
Commercials breweries do that every single day.
Yeah, if we could have been able to blend it back in, it would have been much better.
Yeah, we totally do that. We'll sometimes on purpose go like, okay, we'll intentionally heavy flavor something, because we can do it for a wide variety. So use that one word for umbrella, but we'll just put a lot of flavor of whatever we're trying to do into like one container or a few containers, and then blend that with non-flavored the same product of whatever we're making, and get that to what desired levels of what we want, and then that's what we got.
Yeah. And I wanted to correct myself earlier. I said PDO. It's actually Brett, in the presence of oxygen, produces acetic acid. So I just wanted to clear that up. So anyway, go ahead.
I was going to go with
somebody figured out how to use the Google button on the internet machine.
After I said that, I said, I think that's wrong.
Again,
turn on another podcast
is bad
either.
for everything. All use.
So it sounds like to me that wood is good for all beers as long as the wood is not salty.
Unless you're making a goza.
Really? That was really stretching for that one.
Yeah, that was terrible.
Let's talk about barrel maintenance.
First, I think what we should say is there's a leeway between these two things. Like most of homebrewers are thinking about doing something like a bourbon barrel, whatever, or whatever. But we're not talking as much about straight wood character and whatnot. And we should say that, especially with bourbon, or like any kind of spirit barrel that you get, the first use, maybe the second, pretty much strips away all that liquor character, the spirit character that was in there, right? But all you're left with is then the actual wood character, which has been diminished, right? but
diminished
not as
great.
much.
I would say the wood character has been diminished more than the liquor.
You think
flavor.
so?
Well,
See, this was something I was curious
the
about.
The liquor took a lot of that flavor before
pulled,
we even got it.
right.
Like that's the whole reason that the liquor producer wouldn't give up that barrel if they thought they could get the same amount of flavor out of it again. They'd reuse it. That's just smart economics for them. But they can't, so they sell it to us. We get a diminished wood flavor plus their wood flavor.
Okay.
And then after that, it even goes down like every time.
So it's like sloppy seconds.
So if you're going to take these, well, like here's the leeway here that I'm talking about. A lot of barrel programs, they aren't built necessarily towards the spirit flavored barreling at this point. They're built towards making something that's a new, like wild yeast and whatnot. That's what you've been starting.
No, both.
Well, both, but I mean, there are some places that's all they do. And then
yeah.
when they get wine barrels, that's all that they want to use a wine barrel for. Things like that.
They just want to inoculate it, basically.
Yeah.
And they're not looking for batches to get the wood flavor out of it.
No, I wouldn't agree with that at all. I'd say
you love some infected wood, right?
There's
for this, Stubby.
I didn't say nothing.
I would say it's absolutely both. There's tons of we get barrels in all the time that we're using for our clean barrel program is far larger than our sour and wild program.
Well, but like fooders,
so far.
Fooders are not used for wood flavor because they're used for batch after batch.
Typically,
after batch.
no,
So
but that's all.
they're inoculated
but
with.
That's the reason right there is
Right.
why fooders are typically used only for sour wild ales.
Well, a fooder is just a large barrel.
Yeah, but it's such of a volume that you're counting on that wood flavor. It's one vessel. Think about like when you bottle versus keg, you got to clean 50 containers versus one.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Right.
it's way easier to clean one versus 50. Same thing for a fooder versus a bunch of barrels. Yeah, so I could inoculate 50 barrels.
Right, exactly.
But it's way easier to inoculate one fooder and only deal with that one fooder. So, I mean, that's really why I think that most places that would
And you might explain
choose,
to people what a fooder is, because I think a lot of people out there don't know what it is.
It's a big barrel.
It's just a giant barrel that could fit, like a commercial size fermenter, or a 10 barrels, 30 barrels, 50 barrels on up, versus just like 55 gallons for like a bourbon barrel. But yeah, it's people to me, you inoculate that fooder and then you can empty it of product, refill it up, and it's going to get inoculated with all that wood that's in there that you've built up. You don't have to worry about multiple barrels. And being a bigger vessel, it's more easy for you as a human to get inside and service if necessary, because even with sour and funky stuff, they have to do that from
You're
time to
gonna
time.
let that one go, Stubby? Really?
I didn't want to look over because I was expecting a joke.
Yeah, right.
I don't want to inundate people with
So
stupid dumb.
What
jokes.
I'd like to get is I'd like to move on to actual barrel prep and barrel care and maintenance for home brewers who are going to use barrels, whether they're using a large barrel and their homebrew club is putting multiple batches into it, or one large batch, or if somebody is buying the little 5-gallon barrels here. How do they get that barrel ready to use and maintain it and keep that thing so it's going to have optimal performance when they use it?
All right. First of all, fresher is better. The key component is the staves stay swelled. That's really how the barrel works and stays together. Is the staves are swollen against the rings. So if you have an old barrel, those staves will dry out, and that's why the rings come off. So you want to keep it as wet and swollen, as fresh as possible. But when you get it, if it's super fresh within a few weeks, probably 6 weeks tops, you're probably totally fine. If it's a liquor barrel, check inside it. If you've got any remaining liquid inside, roll it around, swish it around. That bottom part where it's sitting will be just great, but the top part might have dried out, so try to roll it around to get that liquid around.
So is it good to like maybe turn it 15 or 20 degrees every few days or something like that?
Roll it a few times, just in a row, and then like get it roll it around and then let it sit, and you're probably fine. Maybe like every day do that or something until you can get it filled. A good way to swell the ends, if you're concerned, you just want to be really careful, is to put it up on its side and then fill the top of it with boiling water. That'll kind of keep it. That boiling water will be sterile, and then that liquid will swell the outside. So like there will be evaporation, of course, but if it like, you know, significantly goes down, or maybe it was dry inside before and now it's not, you know, liquid got through. Basically just keep letting it sit, keep doing that repeatedly until it doesn't go through or it stays. Flip it over, do the other thing. It can take, you know, anywhere from 30 minutes to hours, sometimes multiple hours, depending on how old the barrel is. If you're not worried about, I never want to like put boiling water in my fresh bourbon barrels, rum, like I guess liquor
Flavored.
barrels. Well, wine barrels I typically always do, just because they don't have the alcohol like level killingness of, you know, liquor. You know,
Right.
like, you know, the fumes from rum, the fumes from bourbon, they're gonna kill anything inside. I know everything inside that barrel is like perfectly sterile, but with a wine barrel, not so much. So those I typically do with boiling hot water. You know, I get our high liquor tank like boiling and then some, because I got to pump it over. I want to make sure it's just stupid hot, because I'm not taking any chances here. So I'll fill those, or like just, you know, splash almost, and roll them around and like let them just kind of steep for a minute. But for like liquor barrels, I try not to go with any inside, because I'm worried about, you know, taking any of that flavor out.
Right.
I'm not sure really why I have a difference between liquor and wine in that aspect. Maybe just because I've never gotten a wet wine barrel, but I've gotten tons of wet spirit barrels, both bourbon and rum, even from faraway places. So it's not just a freshness level. But for some reason, I really don't want to extract flavor out of rum barrels, but I don't care about that for wine barrels for some reason. But I've never had that be an issue. But you can splash them with, you know, boiling hot water, roll them around inside. You can splash them from outside. I had an old barrel. If you're not worried about, if you're trying to funk them up, using, you know, type of, you know, weird, non-normal, yeast or bacterias, then probably don't have to worry about the sterilization as much. You still don't want just wild random, you know, bugs, because there's everything anywhere. So I'd still use boiling hot water. But if I was not looking for really the flavor of the wood, the barrel, the vessel, if I've used it for a number of times, because that happened to me. I had a barrel years ago and used it a number of times and decided I was going to sour it up. Well, I look at it, the rings are falling off. So, well, I just put the rings back in place and filled them with boiling hot water. Water just streamed out like everywhere. It was outside. Well, I just let it do it, you know, filled it up, just kept topping it off, and just kept doing it until it had sealed up. And event with boiling water, because you don't want the water to be non-sterile, because then mold, bacteria started growing there, and it'll most likely be stuff you don't want. So just keep filling up with boiling hot water, because you want the liquid, the humidity of it, but you don't want you want it to still be sterile. So that's why you do boiling, and just keep doing that if you have a really bad one. So you can resuscitate them,
Right.
if you have the magic of a steam one, which I'm not sure how anyone at home would have, and I'm not sure I would recommend. We don't even have one either. But there's something I've seen at distilleries, and it's like they just have their steam system. They just have hooked up this like wand thing, and they just like drop it in a barrel, and it's taken barrels from where you could like see through the staves to within like 10-15 minutes perfectly sealed, because it just swells them up so
Immediately.
fast. Yeah. So you know, if you think you have a way to put steam into the barrel safely, that would probably be a good way as well. You want dry steam, not wet steam. Again, you want any liquid you put in to be as hot and sterile as possible. But yeah, as far as resuscitating a barrel, what you want it wet, swollen, and you want to keep it that way.
Stubby's laughing.
Yeah, I know.
No,
Stubby.
would you say
You want your wood to be wet and swollen
all the time?
And you want to keep it that way.
Do you
And clean.
Would you say there's anything about that? Like if someone had the opportunity to get a barrel of whatever size, and there were a lot of good aspects about it, but maybe there was some stave damage, they just pass that one up, or should they actually try to? I mean, fixing that's
you can do a water
Cooper.
test. So I mean, doing the swelling it on the staves on the heads will give you a water test, so you can see if it goes if it stays or not. Well, they'll tell you whether it's swollen, and sealed up correctly or not. You can also, by filling with that hot water, that will tell you if any leaks out. You can't. If it's a really loose barrel, you might need to readjust the band and get it tighter on there.
Right. Are y'all doing any of that whenever you get these barrels in? Because I remember filling one time with Fritz standing there and looking at what looked like a crack in the top of a barrel for the bourbon, the winter warmer.
The only time I've had
that's
to,
a hell of a thing.
The only time I've had to really do any like real barrel maintenance so far has been, we got in barrels years ago that Fritz ordered, and we didn't really have anything to use them for at the time, and so we just kind of put them away, but used them periodically. And then a few months ago, it was the last of them, and they'd been sitting there by a couple years by then, and some of the rings were starting. None of them were falling off, but they were getting loose, and so I had to pound some of them down a bit.
Okay.
I just got
You didn't have any problems with it.
I just got a hammer. Yeah, I just got to pound the wood. I just got a hammer and some of the tools around the brewery that I could kind of get in, like, because you have.
Were they wooden tools?
No, they weren't actually.
Wood to wood.
But with the ring, it's this very slender. If I put just like a chisel on it, it would cut into it.
Right.
And so that's not wasn't. So I just found whatever random tools I could find that were more blunt, but then I could hit and pound them down. So it was very much I was there at like 10 o'clock at night going, all right, what am I going to do tonight? All right.
Nobody's
okay.
around.
Wood. Gotta pound some wood.
Gonna work the wood. Yeah.
So those were very much of like I had to kind of resuscitate to life, but I was pretty happy with how they turned out. But you can find leaks between where the staves come together. Typically, I haven't found very many leaks within the staves. The way the staves are cut is there are capillary glands in wood that are in trees that go from the center out, and that like helps liquid go from the center to the skin or the bark of the tree. And so barrel staves are typically cut in like spokes of a bicycle. Like if you looked at a tree from the top down, it'd be like spokes of a bicycle is how they're cut. And that's kind of to prevent those lines from drawing it outward. And so you'll typically, they'll be like, the liquid would want to go perpendicular to where those capillary glands are, basically,
right.
Or not glands, but lines. And so that's the way to do that. So it's kind of opposite to that. So you shouldn't have any liquid going through a wood stave itself. That's another reason oak. Y'all been talking a lot about types of wood, and that's something I'm kind of jealous of homebrewers about. Is that as professional brewers, I can't remember the last time I saw a non-oak barrel for sale.
Right.
I can get tons of different types of barrels, of different oaks from different places in the world, different char levels, different liquids aged in them before, but finding a cedar barrel is just non-existent. You almost have to have a special cooper make it for you. So that's something I think is really cool about homebrewers being able to age stuff on different woods, because it's definitely something not available to myself. But that's why oak is kind of the most common one and not any of these other barrels, is because it has a really tight capillary gland.
Easiest and safest to use.
Yeah, and so it's just functionally the best, or one of the best woods for how we're using it. Because people have been using wood for containers of liquids for millennia. It's not new. It's almost like the oldest
containers
way
of everything.
Yeah, it's almost just like the horse and buggy method. But between where the staves meet is where you typically have problems. And those can come from, the wood drying out, not coming back together correctly in some way, or shifting. Typically, if it's dry, like 9 times out of 10, swelling it a bit fixes it. That's the most common problem, is just swell it with, hot water or beer. Beer is not great, but hot water definitely preferable. But it's any liquid will do the job of just swelling it. And then if it's still doing that, you can toothpicks. The people we get our barrel bungs from actually send us packets of toothpicks. It's kind of funny. Like I'll get a bunch of barrel bungs and there's packets of toothpicks in there, but I use them and it works. It's wood.
Get that stuff right out of your teeth.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally wood. I mean, you just it sounds goofy and low key and kooky and what, but I mean, you got this little pinpoint. Like, I can't figure out where you're coming from in the wood and poke you with the toothpick, and
It works.
You're stopped. All right, we're cool. We're good. You can use that. Reeds are really good if it seems to be elongated flat area. A reed will do better than a series of toothpicks. If you really can't get it, wax. You can use wax.
I was wondering about wax.
I've had to use
like
wax once.
Common.
It was a battle, and I eventually won it. I was very happy. It was
wood.
It was one of those old barrels that just didn't
Wax on,
seal
wax
up,
off.
and it was along. It's called the Kreutz. It was on the barrel head, but it was the barrel head met where the staves came just about, and there's just some little spot in there that would just. I think it was actually within the wood itself, ironically enough. And I kept trying to get wax on it, but since it was on a vertical surface, it just did not want to. It just fell down and didn't seep into the wood. And nothing I could do, no matter how much I pressed on it, it was like it wouldn't seep into the wood. It'd seal up, and then like a bubble inside would form, and then I'd get liquid out of it. And eventually I had to tip up the barrel, melt and remove all that wax, and then melt more wax on top and get, on a horizontal surface really where I wanted, let it dry, and then I tipped it back, and luckily enough, it seems to have sealed up. So it was a battle, and I was not going to let it go. This is I'm not going to let this barrel get the best of me.
Wow.
I'm a person. You're an animate object. I'm going to win.
That's
Well,
awesome.
I think too, what comes down to all of this though would be like, if you're going to have the barrels, a lot of times the reason for the damage is the storage method, right? I mean, it wasn't stored properly. Like, you guys had barrels sitting around for a long time. That
Yeah, it
probably
was
weren't-
just stored way too long.
And
so.
what would you say? Like, I see multiple methods as far as the way, even on a homebrew level. This is the same concept here. Mixing potassium metabisulfite and citric acid or tartaric acid or something like that. Various things that depending on.
That's what we've done. If I get barrels in, like brand new barrels, I typically don't mess with, when we get them in, because I try to get them in
and use them.
clone. I try to pretty much already have the beer ready, and I get the
Right.
barrels in, and I can fill them ASAP. Doesn't work. A few weeks, you're fine. It also depends on some barrels I've gotten in. They're they were empty yesterday. Some barrels, they were empty like a month ago.
Right.
The barrels that were empty yesterday, they're probably fine to sit around our facility a while. The ones that are empty 4 weeks ago need to be filled ASAP, etc. So definitely fill them ASAP.
But I would think that would apply to even the smaller ones that we've had. That
for sure, yeah, even more so. If you have a high humidity environment, that's better for them, obviously, than a drier environment. So keep in mind the humidity level. But if they're kind of between fills or something, if it's last year, I kind of decided I stopped wanting to just only use barrels once and then sell off. I just kind of was like, this is just dumb for a lot of reasons. But let's try to reuse them. We have so much. We paid for them. We have them here. Let's try to reuse them. Get another use out of them for something. We won't get all of that flavor. We'll get something. And this kind of happened in conjunction of when we found some of the kegs of a previously barrel aged product to have got some sort of wild yeast in them, but we really liked it. So we kind of were like, well, maybe we can start reusing those in our sour wild program. So we started kind of holding on to all the barrels. So, okay, how do we hold on to them? Because sometimes we didn't want to reuse them right away. We had some stuff that was like, oh yeah, fill them up with that or the other thing. That'll be great, perfect, no big deal. Use them right now. But if I'm emptying a barrel, I'm not reusing it within, say, 2 weeks. I dose it up with, I think, 2 grams per milliliter potassium metabisulfite and 1 gram of citric acid. If it's not that, it's vice versa. I just took it out of the sour book, so it's not my my dosing rate.
The common things. Yeah.
So that's what I typically have done, and you just fill it up. I just dose that in. I just got a funnel, pour it in the barrel, and then top it off with cold water. I feel really weird topping it off with just groundwater. Every time I do it, I really a part of me is like, what are you doing? This is not going to be good. And then another part of me goes, you added a bunch of chemicals. It smells like sulfur. You can barely breathe. It's okay. The bacteria aren't breathing either.
Right.
So,
Which, in the end of it, you just drain that and rinse it out, too.
yeah, I rinse it out like 3 or 4 times.
Do you
Like,
use hot water when you rinse?
Oh, like boiling.
Yeah.
Like, I'm super paranoid. I want none of that in the final product.
Exactly.
But so far, we've reused them and filled them up with other stuff. And so far, it's been so good. So,
Well, one of the things that I think from a homebrew standpoint, a lot of people like to use the little 5-gallon barrels because that's what they're doing. And I think they work great. We sell those little barrels here for different things. And one of the things that I think it best suits for is for doing bourbon barrel aged type flavors. Now, you have to keep in mind, however, that you get that bourbon barrel flavor quicker in a little 5-gallon barrel than what you would in a 55-gallon drum. So you have to really monitor it and make sure that you're taking good care of it. Now, I think there's a lot of debate on whether they make great sour beer, barrels and stuff of that nature. I've done it. I've done it with great success. But I would say that a lot of people, I guess, when they're buying these 5-gallon barrels, the question that I get quite often is, well, how do I reuse them? And I think the best way to do it, if you really want to reuse them as a bourbon barrel aged, and I've done this with great success too, is once the beer has been emptied out of the bourbon barrel, is to go out and buy a couple handles of cheap bourbon.
Right.
And then roll it around in there. And you know what? I've turned out multiple different beers. I've used a barrel 7-8 times and gotten great success with
For a
that.
home brewer, that sounds like it would work. For a pro brewer, not so much. But for a home brewer level,
Well, no,
I mean,
you can't
you're
do
getting
that
what
as
you
a pro
want.
brewer because you can't afford. Well, first
Right.
off, you're not supposed to put bourbon.
Well,
in
Austin's giving that face like, I
beer.
don't think so. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well,
It's
it
like,
works.
for a home
It,
brewer,
it
though.
works.
I mean,
It works fantastic for a 5-gallon barrel.
You're introducing that bourbon flavor, but the wood flavor is still completely gone.
Yeah, no, you don't think that there's wood flavor in bourbon?
I mean, but for what you're doing to me, how you described it, you might as well just like pour a little bourbon in a carboy.
Well, I don't think so because I think you're
Like-
going to still get bourbon.
Because
flavor
what
from it.
wood flavor are you getting at it? Like
You're getting
you're getting it from the
well,
bourbon
yeah,
that
but
you're pouring
probably,
straight
You're
in.
probably getting.
You're
some
not
from,
getting it from the vessel you
could.
aged it in.
You could very well.
7-8 times, man. You've extracted all of that.
Okay.
This was my question earlier.
No, really, I've
Like-
I've never ever had any problems with it.
No, you've
won awards
created
with
great beers, but you've created great beers because
Yeah.
you poured that bourbon like in there, and that's the flavor you got out of
it.
there.
Okay. Well,
You diluted it by soaking it into that wood, and so you're able to extract it in a more controlled manner. But what you just slowed down that.
okay. Well, let me ask
Introduction
you
of
this:
it.
what are you getting from just a regular oak barrel? You don't think you're getting mainly bourbon flavor?
You're getting the char flavor that bourbon gets
Yeah.
originally.
Yeah,
But
but
that-
most of that's bourbon flavor.
It is, yeah. So
You're
that-
not getting oak flavor. That's a way different flavor than you're getting from bourbon.
for the beer.
From a bourbon barrel, if
like-
you just put it in a raw oak barrel,
If I just put it
it's
in a-
way different than a bourbon barrel.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
By charring it, you create those different
But
flavors.
even if you put it in just a charred barrel, it's not going to taste like a bourbon barrel.
Exactly, because it's that bourbon that had that flavor.
Exactly
Just like he was
what I'm talking
he
about.
was that's what I mean. You're getting it by adding that bourbon to it, you're not
Exactly.
recharging the barrel, you're just recharging the beer.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
Well, and
you
that's
said
what I'm.
7
That's
or
what
8
I'm
So I'm
times.
saying just add it directly to the fermenter then, or the serving tank.
Yeah, but you don't get those micro nuances you were talking about.
You're
or
not
that you're
getting
all
that.
that
3
ages.
weeks 3 weeks you're aging this on something
No,
like
well,
that.
maybe not.
You're aging it multiple months.
I have, yes.
Okay.
Multiple. Yeah.
Okay, so you're recharging it with that, but the
Well,
flavor.
I'm just saying, you're going to get a different flavor.
You're
by-
not getting. I'm saying you're not getting any flavor out of the actual wood it's soaking in. You're getting flavor from the wood that bourbon was soaked in.
Maybe, may not.
That is then re-soaking into that.
That's debatable. I would say that's debatable. And I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying that I think that there is some advantage.
I'm
and
saying
some,
you're putting flavor back into the wood.
you're putting flavor into your beer when you put it in a bourbon barrel. Is
I'm
what
just
I'm
saying,
saying.
I'm just glad it's not just me.
That
who
flavor
argues
is
with the
coming.
guests.
That flavor is coming from the bourbon barrel, though. By putting something back into that barrel.
Not really,
I feel
because
so
if you
much better.
just put the beer in a charred barrel,
You're gonna get.
You're going to just get a charred barrel flavor. You're not going to get a bourbon flavor.
Okay, but taking then a charred bourbon barrel that you've used numerous times and then re-putting bourbon in that, that's already been aged in another barrel, not unaged distillate.
I think that you're thinking of like 7-8 times, and Stubby's talking about like 3 times.
Yeah, 3 or 4.
Even after 3 or 4 times, I think you would have extracted all the natural flavor out of that barrel. And it is basically utterly neutral. And then by putting more bourbon or anything back in there, you might have
bourbon actually. Well,
you're certainly going to add flavor back in, but you're not going to like revitalize. You're just adding back.
Okay, well, that alcohol, it soaks into the wood and then it comes back out. It soaks into the wood and it comes back out. You think you're going to get 100% of that, all of that flavor out of that barrel?
You're going to get, after 3 or 4 times of wood liquid soaking into that barrel, you're going to extract so much it is absolutely neutral.
Okay.
There is nothing left in there. Like,
okay.
I guarantee you. There's like, that's why a lot of sour and wild beer producers prefer barrels that have been used numerous times, because they don't want any of that flavor. They just want an utterly neutral vessel that will accept all their microbes, and they can create.
But most of them don't want bourbon barrels either, though.
They don't want bourbon barrels for a lot, because they have a lot of strong flavor, and they're also a lot thinner than wine barrels. Wine barrels typically are a lot thicker, mostly I think because they're not charred, and so they have a bigger difference between them and the outside, less oxidation going in and out. And they don't want those flavors. When you buy wine barrels, you buy them as typically as like flagged as neutral wine barrels, because people don't want that flavor. They want them to be neutral. You're going to get a little bit, but my point is, if you're adding something back into that barrel, then you're adding something back into that barrel, not getting something out of that barrel. So
okay, if that's your opinion,
that's my opinion. That's just a literal fact. If you're adding something to the barrel, you're not getting out of the barrel.
You're arguing with me still. I'm agreeing to disagree with you. Okay,
we'll disagree then.
What about? Is there the ability to re-char a barrel to get the normal?
Yeah, we actually had that question here on Facebook. Good question,
wow.
Chris.
Wow.
Good question.
If you have the ability to safely take off one of the barrel heads,
or even like staves or chips.
No, you'd have to take the head
cubes.
off and get inside.
I mean,
right?
you'd have to take kind of one head off, put it upright, and start a fire underneath it, char all that. But they've already done that, and you'd have to just go deeper into the wood, and that wood would just get thinner and thinner. I would very much not do that.
Okay.
I would not.
Yeah, I think it would be tough to take a barrel apart like that, do that, and then get it put back together.
Theoretically,
right?
It sounds absolutely doable, but I would imagine you would need to be a specialized cooper to be able to, there's specialized tools to get that top ring off a barrel, get it the head out of it, because it's almost like a bike tool
still
you need
keep
from that.
The staves in
place. And then char that, the head, and then char the upturned barrel and char them appropriately, because they've already been charred once and it's already a pretty thin stave, so you're even going thinner. And then you put it back together. So it seems absolutely doable, but I would imagine anybody who's not a skilled cooper could probably do it right.
One thing I'll say is, if you have a smoker, that when you're done with your barrel, that they're great to take apart and smoke meat with. And
I can guarantee they are that.
They are. I've done that, and it works great. It's very. They go a long way too, like half a stave.
Oh, those things burn forever.
Yeah, it gives you a lot of flavor. Well, this has been a very spirited conversation for sure. I feel a lot better about myself.
Well, hopefully that actually answered some questions, because we have had a lot of people ask the questions about wood aging in general, and then barrels are a whole nother animal, and that's why we kind of tackled it this way too. I think, because it's like you can't qualify like it only happens in a barrel. But we'll also blow people's minds when you say, hey, you could do this with cubes and chips just to get that little bit that you're looking for. You don't need a whole barrel.
I think you can really do a lot with cubes and chips, and going into a barrel introduces an entire different set of circumstances. It's on a 5-gallon level, a barrel can be difficult to do. Now you can get. You can, sorry, there's just a lot of cup noise coming from there. You can get completely different results, and I think it's a whole nother level. But there's, as far as the barrel prep and the time it takes and all that stuff, it's a whole different animal. And so I go back to go taste the beers that you like that are barrel aged, and pinpoint exactly what character that's out of it that you like, and kind of start from there as to decide how it is you want to get into wood aging your beers. And
because if you only like that oak sort of flavors, which read about those, that's different than say if you like that real strong bourbon character.
Yeah, it's,
right.
Two completely different
but go
flavors.
into it with a specific end result in mind. I think instead of just I'm just going to throw some wood in my beer and see what happens. I think everything that you do, you should have a specific end result in mind. And this is something that is one of those fun experimental things that sometimes I think that gets lost a little bit. So, in upcoming episodes, we're going to go in depth on the Belgian styles that we talked about recently.
Keep going.
And keep going with that. And we've also got a lot of water stuff to get into soon. We've sent off several water samples from around here, and Mikey is in the process of sorting out all that data and analyzing and all that kind of thing. And we're going to get into that a lot more. That's a subject that we're way overdue to get in depth on. Is water, and I'm really looking forward to that because I think that's the next step for me is really getting into playing around with my water profiles. So that's going to be good. Also, again, please be sure to go to Patreon and help support the show. Again, it doesn't take a whole lot of money to do it. You can get in at $2 a month, $5 a month, $10 a month, or $20 a month, and it's not just supporting the show. You also get things back at certain levels. We were just talking to Stubby a little bit earlier today about some things that we're talking about adding in there in addition to some of the things that we already have. So please go check it out. Every little bit counts for us. If you can just do a little bit, it helps us. This obviously we spend a lot of money doing this, and we can use your help. So please go check that out. Thanks again for listening to Come and Brew Radio, and be sure to share with your friends on social media. Give us some ratings on iTunes and Stitcher. It doesn't take long to just go in there and click that thumbs up. That really helps us out a lot, so please do that. And sending any ideas or comments to info@texasbrewinginc.com. Also, you can always check in on the brew days of our guys at the Brew Focus Facebook pages at Brew with Stubby, Brew with Brando, Brew with Mikey B, Brew with Pete, and Brew with Greg.
Yeah, and thanks, Austin, for coming out tonight.
Thank you very much for coming out, Austin, and come and brew it.
Come and brew it.
Come and brew it.